You've probably heard it before. People say we only use 10% of our brain, and that unlocking the rest could lead to superhuman abilities. But is that really true? Imagine if there were untapped parts of your brain waiting to be discovered, unlocking genius-level intelligence or psychic abilities. This idea has captured imaginations for decades. But here's the kicker. It's a myth. Today, we're going to explore why this myth exists, what the science says about it, and how your brain actually works. Stick around, because you're about to learn some surprising facts about your brain that are even more amazing than the myth itself. Let's begin by exploring the origin of this myth. Surprisingly, it's not clear exactly where the 10% idea started, but several theories point to a few key moments in history. In the early 1900s, psychologist and philosopher William James once suggested that we only use a small fraction of our mental resources. While he never mentioned the 10% figure specifically, his comments were misinterpreted, and over time, this claim evolved into a concrete number. Another possible contributor to the myth comes from early brain studies. When scientists were first exploring the brain, they noticed that only certain areas seemed directly responsible for motor and sensory functions, while the rest appeared inactive. However, this was before modern brain imaging techniques existed, so researchers couldn't yet understand how the whole brain works together. The combination of these misinterpretations, combined with the allure of unlocking hidden potential, helped cement the idea that 90% of the brain was lying dormant. It's easy to see why this myth caught on. From a psychological perspective, humans are naturally drawn to the idea of untapped potential. The thought that we could be using only a fraction of our brain and that the rest is waiting to be unlocked feeds into our desire for self-improvement and personal growth. It's a story that aligns with popular themes in self-help books, movies, and even some educational systems. But here's where psychology steps in again. The myth appeals to our cognitive biases. Specifically, the availability heuristic makes us more likely to believe something because it's easy to understand or feels familiar. The idea of 10% is simple, digestible, and sounds plausible, even though it's completely inaccurate. This is why so many people continue to believe it despite the scientific evidence to the contrary. So, what does science really say about how much of our brain we use? Modern neuroscience has thoroughly debunked the 10% myth. Brain imaging technologies, like functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and positron emission tomography, PET, allow scientists to observe brain activity in real time. What these tools show is that we use virtually every part of the brain, even when we're resting. For example, Dr. Barry Gordon, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, points out that we use virtually every part of the brain, and most of the brain is active almost all the time. Even simple tasks like brushing your teeth or walking down the street activate multiple areas of the brain. The brain is constantly processing information, managing basic bodily functions like breathing, maintaining balance, and analyzing sensory input. Every part of the brain has a specific role to play, whether it's regulating emotions, helping with memory, or controlling movement. One of the reasons the 10% myth persists is that it oversimplifies a very complex organ. The brain is made up of about 86 billion neurons that are constantly communicating with one another. Each neuron forms connections, called synapses, with thousands of other neurons, creating a vast and intricate network. Here's something fascinating. Even during activities like daydreaming or resting, large portions of the brain remain active. This is known as the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is responsible for things like self-reflection, planning for the future, and recalling memories. So even when you're not focused on a specific task, your brain is still working hard in the background. In fact, scientists have found that up to 20% of the body's energy is used by the brain, even though it makes up only about 2% of our body weight. This level of energy consumption wouldn't make sense if 90% of the brain were inactive. The brain is always on, always processing, and always contributing to our survival and functioning. Let's talk about another crucial concept: brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. This refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life. When we learn new things, practice skills, or experience new situations, the brain forms new connections between neurons. This adaptability shows that the brain is constantly in use and growing. For example, studies on musicians, especially those who play instruments like the violin or piano, show that the brain areas responsible for finger movement are more developed compared to non-musicians. This happens because the brain changes in response to practice and use. Plasticity also helps people recover from brain injuries. After a stroke, for instance, people can sometimes regain lost functions through rehabilitation, as healthy parts of the brain can relearn tasks that were once controlled by the damaged areas. This adaptability further proves that we use much more than 10% of our brain, as different areas can step in and compensate when needed. Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence, the 10% myth is persistent. Why is that? The idea has been reinforced by pop culture. Movies like Lucy and Limitless promote the idea that we can unlock hidden powers in our brains if we could just access the unused parts. It's an exciting premise that taps into our fantasies of having superhuman abilities like telepathy or enhanced intelligence. On top of that, many self-help books and motivational speakers have used the myth to inspire people to push beyond their perceived limits. The idea of having an untapped reservoir of brain power ready to be unlocked is empowering. Unfortunately, it's not based on science. This persistence of the myth also highlights how we often cling to ideas that fit a narrative we want to believe. Our desire to achieve more, be better, and grow as individuals can make us more receptive to false but hopeful ideas. While the truth may not sound as magical, it's actually more amazing than the myth. The human brain is one of the most complex structures in the known universe. Its ability to process information, adapt to new situations, and coordinate countless activities simultaneously is incredible. Think about it. Your brain allows you to walk, talk, think, solve problems, feel emotions, and remember your childhood, all at the same time. And it does this without you having to consciously direct every little thing. What's more, scientists are still uncovering new things about how the brain works. While we've come a long way in understanding the brain's functions, there's still so much we don't know. Instead of focusing on unlocking some mythical, hidden 90%, we should appreciate the complexity and capabilities of the brain we already use. So, do we only use 10% of our brain? Absolutely not. We use nearly all of it, all the time. Every part of the brain has a purpose, whether it's for processing thoughts, managing emotions, or controlling movement. The myth is just that. A myth based on misunderstandings and misinterpretations from over a century ago. While we may not have untapped mental superpowers waiting to be unlocked, the real story is even more fascinating. Our brains are powerful, adaptable, and constantly working behind the scenes to keep us functioning. So instead of searching for unused brain power, focus on keeping your brain healthy and active by learning, challenging yourself, and exploring new experiences. If this breakdown has changed the way you think about your brain, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of the brain's complexity surprised you the most? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.